Welcome, everyone. We are now live. We would like to remind all participants this session is being recorded. For those of you just join us now, as a reminder to access that translation from the Zoom during our event, follow these simple steps. At the bottom right of your screen, you will be able to see an icon that resembles a globe. Click on this icon and select the language into which you would like the session to be translated, and our interpreter will provide real-time translation in Spanish. Greetings to all participants, regardless of the time zone you find yourselves in, whether it's the early morning or the evening. I extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us in this second webinar of the three series named Key Drivers of Change that Affect Livestock Systems and Their Impact on Sustainability and Resilience, organized by the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, GASL, a multi-stakeholder partnership recognized for facilitating dialogue, sharing good practices and policies, and promoting the sustainability of the global livestock sector, with the support of the Tropical Agricultural Research and Higher Education Center, hereinafter CATIE, an academic center for innovation and sustainability development in topics related to agriculture, management, conservation, and sustainable use of natural resources. This year, CATIE celebrates its 50th anniversary as an institution dedicated to inclusive green development in Latin America and the Caribbean. Over these 5 decades, we have worked on successful projects in sustainable agriculture, natural resource management, and climate change. And we will continue to promote inclusive green development in the region, such as through this initiative. This webinar that continues today is a crucial space for dialogue and collective reflection. The drivers of change in the livestock sector are diverse and complex, ranging from economic aspects to technological advancements and socioeconomic dynamics. Some of this, which we saw in our first webinar in our discussion with experts on these subjects. We aim to continue a conversation on what are the key driver solutions and how we can collectively approach them. And today we're delving specifically into the topic of health and disease drivers. My name is Mariel Merayo, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's insightful session. Today, specifically, as I just mentioned, we have a packed agenda with esteemed keynote speakers on the topic of health and disease drivers. Several drivers contribute to health and disease challenges within the livestock sector, whether biological, environmental, and management factors. Extensive livestock practices face increasing marginalization, leading to distinct human health risks. These include the transmission of diseases between animals, wildlife, and humans due to close interaction. Land and water resource pressures compel extensively managed livestock to interact more frequently, weakening traditional disease control measures. These are some of the challenges faced today. Before also we dive into our agenda, let me provide you with a brief overview of the methodology we will be following today. We will begin with a welcome address from Ms. Shiri Tarawali, Chair of GASL. Unfortunately, she won't be able to join us in person, but she has sent a video message for us all. We will then be followed by a few words by Mr. Mohammed Ibrahim, Director General of CATIE. We will also have an introduction from Mr. Henning Steinfeld, who will provide context on what are the change drivers and how they are shaping livestock. We will have then 2 panels looking at the solutions and the status of health and disease drivers of change in livestock systems. We will have a brief intermission between panels and finish with a discussion with the panelists and the audience. Again, we encourage you to participate through the platform Slido, which will be featuring questions that we have prepared for you. We look forward to receiving numerous interactions through this platform, and your comments are essential in as we are compiling your ideas and proposals. Now, let's start extending a warm welcome to our first welcoming addressers, Mr. Mohammed Ibrahim. Ms. Shirley Tarawali, as she is not able to join us in person, we will be showing a video of her welcoming words. Ms. Tarawali is chair at GASL and assistant director of the International Livestock Research Institute based in Nairobi, Kenya. She is chair of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, and we will begin with a few words from her.
Good day, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining this online webinar that is one of a series of 3 webinars exploring drivers in relation to livestock systems. These webinars are organized jointly by the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, or GASL, with CATIE, the Tropical Research and Higher Education Center in Costa Rica. And certainly at this juncture, I must begin by saying a huge thank you to our colleagues at CATIE, as well as to the GASL Secretariat, supported by FAO in Rome, for making this webinar series happen. Thank you too to all the speakers and panelists, and to everyone who has made time to join what I hope will be a rich and stimulating, as well as action-oriented series of discussions. My name is Shirley Tarawali, and I'm chair of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, which you'll hear us refer to as GASL, and I'm Assistant Director General at the International Livestock Research Institute, or ILRI, based in Kenya. I'm going to use these few moments now to frame what the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, GASL, is, what its ambitions are, and how this series of webinars relates. So the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock is a quite unique multi-stakeholder partnership that brings together all typologies of livestock stakeholders, from smallholders to commercial and everything in between, and many different organizations, from NGOs to governments, academia, public and private sector, civil society, and multilateral organizations. Through this unique adding together role, GASL works to assemble evidence, to foster dialogue and consensus around livestock-related issues, to support practice and policy change towards sustainable livestock solutions that contribute to development ambitions as described in the GASL vision, which states that by 2030, sustainable, inclusive, resilient and diverse livestock systems across the world contribute significantly to sustainable development and the UN Agenda 2030, and that they're integral to sustainable food systems. Achieving this vision is framed around 4 sustainability domains, and these are food and nutrition security, livelihoods and economic growth, animal health and welfare, and climate and natural resource use. One of the key ways that we work as GASL is to create opportunities for the diversity of livestock stakeholders and the many systems and environments that they represent to come together and identify actions that support more sustainable and resilient livestock systems, and they in turn more sustainable and resilient food systems and better development outcomes. The main opportunity that we operate through is a multi-stakeholder partnership meeting, usually held annually in a different location around the world. And this year's meeting is themed multi-stakeholder collaboration to strengthen sustainability and resilience of livestock systems in response to drivers of change. It'll take place in late October in Chiang Mai, Thailand. This global meeting will be preceded by a series of 8 regional consultations that provide an opportunity for regional livestock stakeholders to explore how different drivers impact on livestock systems, and how and where a multi-stakeholder approach in each of those regions could foster greater sustainability and resilience. While we're well aware of the multiple drivers that impact on livestock systems, which are and must continue to be addressed, things like population growth, urbanization, increasing incomes, concerns about livestock and health impacts and environment, there are these are to some extent what we might call slow drivers. They've been recognized and they've been evolving over many decades. But this year, we recognize that the world has and continues to grapple with many, perhaps we could call them unexpected, in some cases sudden and dramatic drivers of change, and that these have major implications, of course, for every aspect of life, including for livestock systems. The climate crisis, the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, a slate of new technologies, and so on. To better prepare for the regional and global multi-stakeholder consultations, and to ensure that the actions and solutions arising out of these are well informed, we commissioned this series of webinars, bringing together experts from across the world to provide their views on key drivers, what these mean for those 4 sustainability domains, and how GASL's unique multi-stakeholder nature can support greater livestock sustainability and resilience. The drivers are environmental and technological innovation drivers, health and disease drivers, and geopolitical and socioeconomic drivers. So today's webinar forms one of these webinars around these drivers. And I would like to, again, thank all of you who've taken time to prepare, welcome everybody, and I hope this will be a rich and informative session. And again, my thanks to everybody for taking part today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words, Ms. Tarawali. And we are now being joined, or we now welcome rather, Mr. Mohammed Ibrahim. He is Director General of CATIE. He is a Doctor of Agricultural and Environmental Science. He has more than 26 years research experience on livestock and environment. He has contributed to generating knowledge on silvopastoral systems and quantification of ecosystem services in these systems, which are being used in the development of policies for climate-smart livestock systems. We welcome Mr. Ibrahim. Thank you very much, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mariel. Greetings to all the participants in this meeting. Regardless of the time zone that you are located, we would like to give you a special welcome to this webinar series, the second series, which is focused on key drivers of change and impact the sustainability and resilience of the livestock systems. Today, this meeting is going to focus mostly on the discussion around health and diseases, and it's an honor for me to welcome you to this meeting. Before I go above, I would like to thank Dr. Shirley Tarawali, President of the Global Agenda for Livestock, and Dr. Eduardo Arce, who supported the cooperation of CATIE in organizing this meeting. About CATIE is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And since the inception, CATIE has been an institution which has been focusing to produce and conserve and produce using a transdisciplinary and systemic approaches to do research, education, and outreach to have impacts in the work that it's been doing. It has been working in several disciplines related to sustainable agriculture and has been working throughout the Mesoamerican, Latin American, Caribbean region to promote tools and knowledge to the decision makers adopting technologies. Within CATIE's structure, we have the Livestock and Environmental Unit that has been working over the last 25 years, focusing on transforming conventional sustainable systems towards more sustainable livestock systems using the whole approach of sustainable intensification. This unit has been working towards developing knowledge using silvopastoral systems as a base for transforming and using sustainability, but also to work on quantification of ecosystem services, carbon, water, biodiversity, for example, and looking at the impacts on productivity and livelihoods with a gender approach as a way of looking at the social impacts, social and economic impacts. It also has been focusing on measuring, looking at the metrics for adaptation and mitigation to climate change, and has been working with several stakeholders to look at transforming the livestock systems to a low carbon economy. CATI has also been supporting, the unit has been supporting, looking at strengthening the rural extension services so that we can have the farmers and the different stakeholders adopting these technologies and having a scaling up of that. We think that's very important by providing the incentive schemes. We've been working in differentiated policies for climate finance, as for example, new programs have been implemented with the NAMA facility, or MAF, the Mitigation Action Facility, which is now called. And there are several other programs that is being implemented. CATI has also been working with the local stakeholders, as well as the policymakers from regional bodies, for example, the Central American Commission for Agriculture and Environment, the Central American Commission for Agriculture Ministries, with an objective to promote intersectoral policies that will enhance the scaling up of sustainable livestock systems. We have been moving from research towards scaling up, working with policies. I think that this program here today, this webinar today, is going to discuss important points where we've been working on to look at the landscape approach. Within the landscape approach, CATI has been working in terms of quantification of biodiversity, looking at the structural changes that we have, and it has a lot of relation to do with zoonotic diseases. We look at the structure, the functions, how the distribution of forest patches can occur, what are the interactions between the local communities, and how these drivers might help, and designing the landscape might help to retain some of the problems we've seen with zoonotic diseases, as an example in this case. So I think this seminar is going to be very important for generating knowledge, and CATI is available to continue the discussion as to continue working with the global agenda for livestock and other stakeholders to advance on this discussion. I'll be available to work with the team. I would like to thank the team, the Livestock and Environment Unit, who has been working with the global agenda for livestock to put this series up. And we look forward to look at the notes that is coming out from these webinars. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your words, Mr. Ibrahim. We will now continue with our next session. I would like to remind everyone that we are now giving the first question for you to interact with in Slido. You will find this in the chat. We will appreciate all of the comments and information that you can provide there, as well as through the chat. I will continue now introducing Dr. Henning Steinfeld. He's a German agricultural economist currently serving as consultant for Gasol and previously headed the livestock sector analysis and policy branch at FAO in Rome. He brings extensive expertise in agricultural and livestock policy with a particular focus on environmental issues, poverty alleviation, and public health. He will share insights on change drivers, how they're shaping the livestock sector regionally and globally. Mr. Steinfeld, you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marielle, and good day, everyone. Good to be in this meeting again. So I've been asked to look at drivers of livestock systems change and provide some initial ideas as to how we may want to look at drivers in the context of what we're observing around us. Next one, please. The introductions have already pointed out that the motivation of this idea of looking at risks and change and drivers is that there is quite a rapid change, and we have had dramatic developments over the last 3-4 years that gives us the idea that there's a growing uncertainty. So this multiple crisis, the pandemic, the tensions, the inflation and debts, the climate, the environmental degradation, the growing inequality, and the rise in poverty and hunger are all issues that should worry us deeply. And important for FAO and others, the UN 2030 agenda is just massively off track. So there's a sense there's a growing instability and risk of disruption, and livestock systems are part of the dynamics that unfold. So it is thought that the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock might be a good forum to look at the ongoing change, to respond to it, and to identify pathways for adjustment and transformation, with the idea to improve resilience and sustainability across the board. Next one, please. So the method that we propose is very simple. We look at drivers, and some of them have already been mentioned. They impact on livestock systems, which is described as a state. And then there is usually a response by stakeholders, by producers, by consumers, by others who are engaged in livestock systems. And we follow an agri-food systems approach. That is, we look at not only production, but we look at feed, energy. We look at how health and disease aspects are embedded into systems. We look at the social and economic dimensions of it, and so on. And we do that, or we propose to do that through, as Shirley has already mentioned, to looking at the sustainability domains that have been identified within the global agenda. So food and nutrition security, livelihoods and economic growth, climate and resource use, and animal health and welfare are the domains that have been kind of identified over the last 5 years by the participants in the global agenda. Next one, please. So food and nutrition security, here are some of the drivers that have been mentioned so far. Of course, the demand story is still ongoing, has been running for a long time, driven by demographics and urbanization and economic growth and increase. Somehow, of course, we seem to reach saturation or flattening increases, and with aging also some declines, actually. In total demand. On the supply side, we have important developments that have to do with international trade and the de-risking of supply chains, countries wanting to have production closer to home. And then the issue of costs, particularly feed and water, which are the main elements when it comes to livestock production. Consumer orientation is changing, not only in wealthy countries, but across the globe, actually. Health, welfare, lifestyle issues come into how people think about livestock systems and livestock products. And healthy diets when it comes to diseases and health of humans, of course, have an important connection also with food and nutrition security. Next one, please. So the second domain, livelihoods and economic growth. Here we have some drivers of change. We have growing inequalities, rising poverty and malnutrition. We have the direct impact of climate change on producers. Not to forget that this is actually one of the sectors, one of the activities that is most affected by climate change. The reduced access to resources and input costs, the market volatility that is important in many places. Regulatory policies that are driving change as well. And then, of course, for this meeting today, the differential impact of animal diseases on producers. In other words, diseases do not actually, they discriminate among producers, so they hit producers in different ways, and therefore trigger structural change in many places. Next one, please. The drivers of change when it comes to climate and resource use, resource scarcity, land, water, nutrients, biodiversity losses are all issues that affect livestock systems. Climate change manifesting itself in heat waves, droughts, flooding, and fire, and inevitable, of course, the need to adapt to these changing circumstances. Then, of course, the fact that climate change policies start to address livestock systems and what are the implications of that. Ecosystem degradation is an issue, of course, also when it comes to the topic of this meeting today, as a driver, of course, of disease emergence and spread. Next one. Animal health and welfare. Here are some of the issues that have been raised. So the emergence and spread of diseases is an issue that is moving rapidly. Food safety issues are also quite varied across the world, but certainly an issue to look at as a driver. Antimicrobial resistance has been a topic for some 10 years or so, but continues to gain importance as a driver of change. New treatments and vaccines, there's much in terms of promising technology coming online that have the potential to drive change. And of course, here again, what does the consumer think about all that? And what's the reaction on the demand side? Next one, please. So some of the technologies that have an impact and need to be considered perhaps outside these specific domains that we have identified. The digitalization, big data, machine learning, and robots have an impact in many places in livestock systems and drive change. Genomics is another very promising area in terms of within system change. And then the development and emergence of substitutes and alternatives to conventional livestock products that may also drive change. Next one, please. So drivers of change, we haven't actually identified or proposed a level at which these drivers are supposed to be looked at, but it is important that drivers behave in different ways and they have a certain direction and they may be linear or almost linear or very, very exponential, very fast changing and perhaps also changing direction. So it is to be looked at as kind of waves that trigger change in our livestock systems. It is important also to look at the time scale of change. Is this a slow moving, as Shirley has called it, or a fast moving driver? The disease, the pandemic has certainly been a fast driver. And in many regards, climate change also has become a very fast driver. So this is to be looked at in terms of the time scale. The space scale equally, here we have many, many local impacts, but at the global scale, the picture may look quite different. So what is the space scale? Who's affected? Which are the geographies? Which are the people who are in different places who are affected by this change, and what are the consequences of that? We also have the fact that these drivers, they work together sometimes, and sometimes they work against. So we have synergistic and antagonistic drivers. So as you can imagine, they move into different directions, and sometimes they are going into the work together or not. So while driven, of course, these livestock systems are also drivers of change, and particularly for the disease and health side, I think it is important that we look at the drivers of diseases, but we also look at disease as a driver. So there is this two-way relationship, which I think is well embedded in the One Health concept. And I think it's another slide, Marielle. Yes, so with these drivers, we look at the state, we look at livestock systems, and I think it has already been mentioned, we need to acknowledge and recognize and develop on the basis of diverse livestock systems. They are quite different in terms of species, purpose, products, services, and so on. So what is the exposure of these different systems to these drivers that we have identified? And how can these systems then cope? Can they cope? Or maybe it's not a problem at all, or maybe they thrive. So there are different ways of responding to this. And this takes us to the response, to the solutions. And I think within the context of a system approach, we realize that solutions are not one-off fixes, but they are integrated processes of adjustment and transformation that include a host of different activities, reforms, innovations, different schemes, different ideas of tackling the problem in an integrated way. So with that, back to you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steinfeld, for your introduction. We are now going to take a look at what you have been answering. We asked you to summarize in a single word the most influential health and disease driver affecting livestock systems. And here we have the results. So far, the most common answer is infectious diseases. You can see here there are other factors such as animal management, accessibility, zoonotic diseases, investment, respiratory diseases. Thank you very much for the people who have been answering. This allows us to interact directly with you and what you think are the main drivers. We will now include a new question through the Slido. You can find this in the chat box. We encourage you to include your comments throughout our next presentation. Now, we are honored to welcome Mr. Luis Barcos, Regional Representative for the Americas of the World Organization for Animal Health, as our keynote speaker for this segment, followed by an expert panel on solutions. Dr. Luis, I will introduce you now. Is a veterinarian. He has worked in different activities related to genetics, management, reproduction, and health in herds of different bovine breeds. Throughout his professional career, he has served as Executive Secretary of the Argentine Chamber of Insemination and Embryo Transfer, as long as other relevant positions. Since 2004, he serves as the Regional Representative for WOAH at the Americas. Mr. Barcos will provide a comprehensive overview of the current health and disease drivers of change in the livestock sector. Mr. Barcos will be speaking for 25 minutes. I will be letting you know when you have 5 minutes left. You now have the floor.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to all the participants. Thank you for inviting our organization to this important discussion about the drivers that have impact in the livestock production system and sustainability. Our organization is the global authorities on animal health, and we work to ensure animal health and recognize that animal health, of course, affects everyone's health. And as maybe some of you know, our organization was created in 1924. Next year is the century anniversary of our creation, and our organization are integrated with 183 member countries, and we have a headquarters in Paris and 13 regional and sub-regional representation. 75 partner organization, international organization, in private sector, different organizations that are our partners, and more than 300 referent centers. As you see in the slide, our organization was created before the United Nations creation in 1945, and in 2003 we adopted a new name because our organization was created as Office International des Epizotis, and now the name is World Organization for Animal Health. And last year we adopted a new acronym and visual identity. What we do, I try to summarize in 4 main issues: animal health and welfare. We focus monitoring and dissemination the knowledge, scientific knowledge to our members and the community in order to limit the negative impact of the disease. We are the global organization in charge of setting standards. These standards are used for our members as a legal framework for elaborate their own legal framework at national level, and also it's used for safe trade, not only at national level, also at international level. Trade, we through our standard safe trade is one of the main pillar from the beginning of the creation of our organization. We have several global initiatives in order to support our members. We have a tool for evaluation of the capabilities and gap and weakness of the country members. We already do more than 142 missions in different countries in order to help them in detect their weakness. And the other issue is the private-public partnership that I will mention in several opportunities in my presentation. And also the scientific publication is part of the one of the sources of our work for the standard setting process, and also for provide the last updated information for our member in order to reduce the impact of the disease in the animal production. How we support our members? We have the different option or tools or issue that support the daily work of our member, and also the animal health improvement. One is the official recognition of animal health status. We have a specific procedure for that. For the disease that don't have a procedure for the official recognition status, the country could be used as self-declaration of animal health. All these issues are really useful for the facilitation of the trade, and also for improve the animal health situation in the country. We have a specific guideline for improve the veterinary service, the capability of the veterinary service. We have a really extensive global expert network, and also the network of a laboratory of center of reference. I was already mentioned in the first slide that we have more than 300 reference centers, some of them in coordination and combination with our partner. We elaborate a standard recommendation for veterinary product and biological for the prudent use of them. We also have a recommendation and guideline for emergency preparedness, and already mentioned the PBS pathway is the process for detect the gaps in the countries and use this report. The country use the report of the PBS mission for improve their own capabilities. And the public-private partnership, we believe we develop the guidelines, and we believe that this is a really important issue to be implemented in the countries in order to help in the implementation of the different activities for prevention, control, and eradication of the diseases. We know that the animal production constitutes the 40% of the value of the global agriculture, and also support the income, the livelihood, one of the in 5 people, mostly in developing countries. And animal production, as mentioned in the previous slides, support the livelihood of the 1.3 billion people directly, and 600 million are smallholder farmers of the world's poorest countries. And we know that the pure animal health affect production and direct impact in the farmers and society. Yes, as the previous speaker mentioned, animal health reduce animal production, and for farmers, I give just 2 or 3 examples here, but we have much more than the examples mentioned here. For farmers, death of animals, low yield, production of milk production, beef production, for people and society, limitation of the food access, poor quality animal product, death of animals, and also additional cost, medicine, vaccine, time for human treatment, public health costs, many impact of. We have a main challenge, climate change that was already mentioned, natural resources degradation, pandemic threats, and antimicrobial resistance. All of these issues impact to the animal health. We have a lot of scientific publication in each of these points. It's not the time now to speak of each one, but we have a really good in our website. Any person could access to the scientific publication in this issue and see the impact in the livestock production in the animal health too. Another statement that I like to share with you is that more than 70% of the additional animal protein will be needed for feed the world in 2050. That is a really big challenge, and we are really close to this time, 27 years from now. And I think many of you are already see this picture, that the relation and the impact of the disease in different sectors. 60% of the human infection disease are zoonotic disease, and 75% of the pathogen emergency human infection disease are from animal origin. And this is another issue. 80% of the pathogens could be used as terrorism, bioterrorism proposed, and also are zoonotic, some of them. 5 new human diseases appear every year, of which 3 of them come from animal origin. This is the picture that show the interaction of the pathogens and the spread of the pathogens between the ecosystem, and is the only way to work together is the one with a One Health approach. I like to mention in really briefly our 7 strategic plan, the 5 pillars. Scientific expertise. This is basic because our organization is, as I already mentioned, is the global organization in charge of the standard setting process, and our standards are made by a scientific basis, but also scientific expertise is a crucial issue for help in the control and prevention of the disease, and also animal welfare. The second point is data governance. Our organization improved from 2021 until we will finish in 2025, the modernization and digital transformation in order to provide better service to the members and all over the world. And one important issue, our members are the veterinary service of the 183 countries, and we want to strengthen the capabilities and the visibility and the recognition at country level of the veterinary service, because they are the first barrier of control of animal diseases. collaboration with partners. Any organization can work in isolated way, and our organization promote in our strategic plan the strong collaboration with the partner. Efficiency and agility. Our organization was growing up from 1924, where we was 28 members countries, and now with 183 member countries and many other activities that we do now. But we take into account don't lose efficiency and agility and respond in really fast way all the emergency and the situation. This is a crucial issue. We don't want to become a really bureaucratic and heavy and non-efficiency organization. In our strategic plan, we consider the issue for improve the sustainability of animal production. This is one of the main objectives, and we believe that through the strong veterinary services in each country, we could contribute to minimize many trends that impact in the sustainable animal production. We have in our website, it's possible to find information about sanitary situation and in three languages. And I like to show you just an example, because we have many diseases all over the world, but I like to show just the map of the distribution of, for example, FMD all over the world. In blue, you see the countries that are free with or without vaccination. In different color are the countries where the disease is present. As you know, in many countries, the disease are present today. Even we have an excellent tool for control the FMD. We have excellent vaccine for control. But you know, the vaccine is not the only issue for control the disease. We have we need to have a good veterinary service. We have a good structure, good relation with interaction between the public and private sector. Is more than that, but we have a good tool for control the disease. In the case of African swine fever, just to know, as you see in the slide, 74 countries notified the disease since 2005. 10 countries report their first case from January 2020. 13 countries report spread the disease in new zone. And well, this disease is really, I'm sorry, I will back. This disease is really complicated, and I will be back. I'm trying to do, yes, here. This disease is really complicated to control. We don't have vaccine until now, and it's really difficult to control the disease, and the impact in the production is really important. Avian influenza is. We are really worried about the new virus of avian influenza that are circulating from 2020, and because this virus was affected another species, they affected now the mammals, and we are really worried for a spread of this disease, and we are working together with other organizations in order to prevent the pandemic potential of this influence, avian influenza. Here, the crucial issue is the work that the veterinary service and in coordination with public health and environmental agencies may do and must do in order to prevent the dissemination of this disease. We have a really good tool. We have vaccines, really good vaccines, but the use of the vaccine are on the decision of each country. Our organization give the guideline for produce the good vaccine at the guideline and how they could use when and in a good way. Here you see the spread of the disease in non-commercial poultry. That is it's a really problematic issue. What our organization propose? We propose, we are part of the quadripartite, and we work under the One Health approach. We have at least 5 main issues to work together under this framework: antimicrobial resistance, avian influenza, rabies, zoonotic disease, and food safety issues. And the other issue is to strengthen the veterinary and aquatic animal health service. This is a really, really important issue, because if in the countries don't have a good veterinary service, it's impossible to control, prevent, or eradicate the disease. When I mention veterinary service, I mention not only the government, the veterinary service in the government, I mention all the structures that are in charge to control the disease in the country, including the private sector. We have different tools for help the members, as already mentioned. The PVS evaluation tool is a mission through the expert that go to the countries and see the gaps and make a report to the country in order to see how the country could improve their capabilities, and the strong promotion of private partnership as a model for improve the capabilities in sustainable way at the country level. Also, we support the research in our members in vaccine development, new diagnosis technology, alternative for antibiotics, and social economic economic impact studies. We promote the cooperation involve all stakeholders at all levels: government, civil society, producer, professional, academia, reference laboratory. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barcos, for your interesting presentation. We also want to share now some of the reactions that we have been receiving through the Slido. As you saw in the question, you were able to include what are some of the positive or negative drivers affecting health and diseases, and we have several answers here already. I guess, as mentioned here, we have issues with supply chains, emergence of new diseases, private services. We have reference to specific diseases, poor biosecurity practices. Also here, as Mr. Barcos was mentioning, the issue of vaccines. We have another interesting element of political will, which indeed is another element to be considered. Thank you very much for everyone who has been responding. We encourage you to continue participating through the Slido. We will introduce the question as we move forward to our next panel of speakers. We have 2 different panels of speakers. The first one is of 3 expert panelists. They will be sharing some of the insights to solutions to address these health and disease challenges. Each panelist will be speaking for 10 minutes, and we will then interact with them through questions and interventions from the audience. I will begin by introducing our first speaker, Mr. Keith Sumption, He is Chief Veterinary Officer of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, leader of the Animal Health Program, and Chief Joint Center for Zoonosis and Antimicrobial Resistance. He has worked on disease and ecology at the interaction of wildlife, domestic, and environment for more than 30 years. Mr. Sommersen, you now have the floor. I will be letting you know through the chat when you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you very much. It's really a big pleasure to be here, and congratulations to the organizers. If I can share my screen, I will do so. I hope that is coming through clearly for everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, I took the question that you were posing, and I was to be how does animal disease itself, rather than the drivers of disease, but the animal diseases that we're facing, and Luis has mentioned ones that I will also mention. How are they changing the way livestock production systems, as well as some other ones that he didn't mention, but I will go into. Now, Henning Steinfeld has spoken earlier, and he will recognize this, and he referenced this, and this is the pressure state response framework. So the pressure, and here coming from not simply these changing landscapes, but considering the pressure coming from disease upon the sustainability of animal production systems and how we respond to that. And what would be our priorities for that, coming from that, for intervening to build the agroecological resilience at the producer level through to that of the environment in which animals are produced. So just to add a bit of flesh to what has been mentioned before, we do have some very high impact animal diseases for which vaccines are in the case of African swine fever, not available, and others such as avian influenza, where they may be available but not used for a number of reasons. This example here is following what happened when African swine fever reached China. There was a very dramatic contraction in the sow population. There was a huge increase in the live pig price, and there was significant differences between provinces. It led to a response on an immediate basis of more imports were needed, and liquidating breeding herds as a result of control measures and changes in policy, driving out some small producers. The follow-up to that event has seen a rebuilding of China's pig production systems, but rebuilding them to meet new policies relating to biosecurity and requirements in relation to the safety of feed entering into those systems. So we've seen a change. Some of the reports indicate it as being a forward integration, a closer connection of the feed producers through to pork production systems, an integrated system, resulting largely from a disease burden. Something similar has been seen also in Japan and Vietnam, with the number of small-scale swine farms decreasing. In Vietnam, the figures are indicated here. A decrease in small-scale livestock production by 15 to 20%, and reducing the total volume coming from those households. Pig farms becoming larger in size. There is a capital investment required, and that can be too much for some producers. And that has also led to some of the significant investments coming from outside, capital investments, perhaps reducing the economic efficiency of pig production and squeezing out the smaller scale producers who are not able to meet those requirements. So a response is not to get rid of the disease, it's find a new way to be able to cope economically with the presence of disease in that population. Avian influenza has, in some respects, some similarities, and Luis has already mentioned about the significance of this sort of recent global spread, driven by really new strains that are far more infectious, and they have reached most parts of the globe by now. very dramatic impacts in terms of requirements for biosecurity being imposed by countries which are suffering outbreaks. That limits can limit has welfare concerns. It can limit the movement of birds, and it results in where the disease is not controlled by biosecurity, a very significant destocking. So the numbers are very dramatic, and they're dramatic not only in the poultry population, but also in terms of the numbers of wild birds affected. So we now have some tension between the potential sources of infection, wild as well as domestic, and the potential at times spillover to other populations. So it's an important structural driver for shaping the poultry sector in a number of countries, with small-scale producers leaving the industry in many places. Again, the costs of biosecurity are often need to be met by those producers with investments. They may not have access to the credit to be able to do so. And the outbreaks themselves might result in behaviors that we find understandable if risky, such as rapid sale of birds to mitigate losses which can place more disease into the value chain. So in response to these types of problems, we have developed a progressive management pathway for terrestrial animal biosecurity, and the principles of that are also mirrored in a parallel pathway for aquaculture. And the concept here is the co-creation of biosecurity between producers and public policies to be able to initiate an improvement in biosecurity that's accessible for the many as far as possible, but at least is supported also by public policies that would incentivize or support the increased biosecurity from the backyard to the border, from the producer level upwards, with a focus on that producer level as important. And this has been trialed over the years in many different respects, because biosecurity is one of those few tools that we all understand is necessary for animal disease control. And it's been worked through in practical public and private systems in a number of countries, such as Vietnam. Bring in another slightly different driver for change, and that is the driver to reduce antimicrobial use. And there, the concerns over the antimicrobial use in livestock production have been part of the system for change. So here, it's not only animal disease that's driving, it's a combination of the response to animal disease, which can be antimicrobial use, and how requirements to reduce antimicrobials in use have driven producers and their service providers to find other ways avoiding the use of antimicrobials over time. And an example of how this can drive some changes that are perhaps not always obvious would be moving towards more resistant, disease-resistant forms of production, such as slower growing chickens, to meet the requirements for reduction in antimicrobials and to reduce the on-farm use. And the drivers for compliance in that can be found in a number of ways, such as good agricultural practices and systems to be able to recognize at country level whether those changes have happened, whether producers are adhering to those good agricultural practices. Another example, which is really quite different, but is still related rather to the problem of resistance, and the video is sort of showing the example, is that control of livestock ticks has been really rather left to producers to work out with their service providers. And this has led to now really an alarming level of resistance ticks to the common chemical compounds which are used to control. And all sorts of practices have been used, malpractices, to try to deal with resistance. Now, what's the impact of that? That's changing production systems in some ways, because when you can't control the ticks, you have to reduce their numbers by other means, which include changing the use of pasture, the rotation of pastures, the movement control on animals, which to reduce ticks being moved, and genetic selection to avoid the problem. The way out of resistance is going to need a multiplicity of routes, and they include possibly really having to rethink in pastoral systems how to manage the burden if it can't be managed by the things we've been using in the past. Some final examples, really one coming from Africa, is African trypanosomiasis. Most people know that in areas where particular trypanosome species are present, usually forested areas, the forests to some extent are protected from grazing by the presence of trypanosomiasis. But if you start to control or eliminate the vectors, then you also change the use of that landscape. And that so we know that on one side, control can shift and improve productivity in cattle systems, but at the same time, they also brings new potential areas of concern, such as reduction in the amount of forest in that system, or invasion of forests. So how do we, in the end, how do we mitigate the impacts of disease drivers? Some of the ones I've mentioned will require really action at the primary production services level. So our public policies oriented to assist producer level resilience, producer level health in their animals are going to be important. And this is something we, to some extent, neglected over the years, that if we are going to truly avoid diseases from really reorganizing our production systems, then we need to have far more in the way of support at the primary producer level. And that will, such as biosecurity measures, will actually help to also cut the use of antimicrobials in those systems, build better resilience, and we believe through a mixture of support, transform the productivity at the producer level. And I bring attention to the big conference we have in a few weeks' time on sustainable livestock transformation in Rome, which I hope many of you will follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sumption. I will now proceed to introduce Mr. Bernard Betts. Mr. Betts, can you check if you can share your screen? I believe you're having issues with your camera. But if you would like, you can start sharing your screen and your presentation so we can test it out. Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Betts. So Mr. Betts is Senior Scientist Animal on Human Health. He has a background on infectious disease, epidemiologist working with International Livestock Research Institute. He's the team leader of the One Health Center in Africa, based in ILRI, which implements applied research and capacity building activities in multiple countries in East and West Africa. Bernard's specific interests are on generating knowledge on the transmission patterns of vector-borne zoonotic diseases that can be used to improve existing surveillance and control options. You have 10 minutes, Mr. Betts, and you can start now. I will be letting you know when you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. I hope you can hear me, even though the screen isn't running.
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect.
Yeah, okay. So I understood also this topic differently, because I thought, what I would look at it as drivers of emerging infectious diseases, but also at the same time, look at how those drivers influence livestock production in parallel. So I'll start by, I think you have already introduced me. This is, I work here at International Livestock Research Institute. So I'll first define what these emerging infectious diseases are. And I think you have already learned that these are diseases which are newly appearing in a population, or those ones which are spreading quite rapidly over large geographical areas, or even increasing in incidence in the same areas. We see generally that there's an increasing trend in the occurrence of these diseases. And I've used two diseases here, that's African swine fever and highly pathogenic avian influenza, to show the statistics which are available from the WOHA webpage, showing increasing number of countries which are reporting these diseases. ASF mainly in Asian countries, HPAI mainly in the northern Western countries. But also of interest is lumpy skin disease, which many reports are coming from Asia, indicating that the disease is really rapidly spreading northwards, basically because of climate change. Going back to the drivers, I've focused mainly on three specific drivers. One is on international trade in livestock, as well as globalization. The next is an intensification of production, and last, climate and land use change. So going back to the trade in livestock, of course, we know how this happens. Whenever we export animals, there's a likelihood that some of the animals are already infected, and they end up introducing new infections in the new territories. But globalization tends to work in slightly different way, but very similar. But this could also be because of increased travel and exchange of materials in different countries. We could then export some of these pathogens in products, or even in fomites, or even in vectors. I understand sometimes when we transport animals, some of the vectors cling on those animals, and they end up introducing new infections in new territories. For intensification of livestock, I'm using this old report, which was done many years ago. It still applies now, showing that with increasing human population, the demand for animal source foods is really rising. And what is happening here is an attempt by producers to intensify production so that they can produce more to meet the increasing demand. But with intensification, there's a high chance that new diseases will emerge, either from lack of biosecurity practices, or because of keeping large number of animals in small places. So the contact patterns then change, or in some cases, new viruses emerge because of course, mutations and genetic drifts. Climate change has also been discussed a lot, and this is the reason why we are seeing increasing incidence of vector-borne diseases being introduced into previously very cold locations, which couldn't be ideal for the development of the vectors. But with temperature changes, those vectors are now surviving much from one season to another. But climate change, we have tended to discuss it mainly focusing on vector-borne diseases, but it really affects many diseases in many pathways, indirectly, sometimes even through dampening the immune response in animals. We saw one of the publications showing that in fish, whenever you increase temperature, the immunological responses then reduces, and then you start questioning the extent to which such animals would then respond to infectious diseases. For impacts, I would really not go much into this because it has been really elaborately discussed by the previous presenters, but I wanted to highlight the economic losses which come from infections mainly by these emerging infectious diseases. And I found a nice publication from Vietnam indicating that the recent ASF outbreaks have really reduced the level of GDP in those countries by that proportion, ranging between 0.4% to 1.8%, which is really a huge loss in terms of absolute figures. Environmental impacts have not really been estimated that much, but if you think about it, if you lose animals in the wild, then there's lots of multiplier effects in terms of losing the ecosystem services which those animals provide. So I haven't really seen much of frameworks which are being used to estimate those, but I think it will become more important in future when we start thinking of environmental impacts of diseases. This is now where I get to how I understood the question to be. I understood it to mean look at each driver and understand how it affects a given livestock production system, so that I have the driver on the extreme left. In the middle is just a very crude way of trying to understand when you have an intensifying system, there's a very high likelihood that then those producers who are actually able to produce under this new systems will continue producing, and they might eclipse the small farmers who may not meet the stringent requirements that are required for intensification of production. So they would, in a given area, there will be inequalities and marginalization of smallholder farmers, so that the dominant players will then be the ones to produce more. In such a case, it introduces lots of challenges in terms of service delivery, because you really need to reach both sections of farming communities. And I'm thinking that biosecurity measures might really help introducing disease incidences in intensifying productions. But introducing digital tools, for example, in some of our marginal areas here in Kenya, people talk about using drones to deliver vaccines to remote locations in pastoral locations, because those communities are actually being marginalized because of lack of attention from the government. For the second driver, when you talk about globalization and livestock trade, there's a major worry that it will then introduce much stricter regulatory frameworks to allow a few farmers to access high niche markets where they can then get their, of course, income. But then, as somebody said earlier on, there's a likelihood that then we'll see more regional markets coming into being, so as to bridge that gap in terms of productivity at the local levels. And so at the end of the day, I see differences in terms of the value chains that might emerge because of this globalization and increased livestock trade. Some of the things we could do to help manage diseases in such a scenario is to introduce traceability, so that we can then be able to track disease transmissions along the various marketing chains that come into being, but also to really encourage countries to use equivalence and risk assessments to identify how these regional markets can be developed. And these regulations are already defined in the WOHA Code of Trade. Same to zoning and compartmentalization, that really help in reducing disease transmission across large geographical boundaries. But for climate change, there's lots of stresses that can come in, including heat stress, reduced water availability, reduced feed availability. And in what we see currently is the shift in terms of the species that are kept by farmers, whereby we see more of goats and sheep and camels being raised in very dry pastoral ecosystems. Some of the things we could do to manage diseases in these cases would be to encourage the use of new technologies like vaccines and diagnostic kits, but also to really develop these data-driven forecasting systems so that we can able to detect diseases in time before they come because of climate change. My last slide basically is to summarize and say, of course, drivers for EIDs are not just drivers for diseases, they also shape the types of livestock production systems that are likely to come up because of the changes that have been identified. And as we think about interventions for diseases, we should also be thinking of how to respond to the changes in those production systems. But I think, as has been said also, we really need to build more capacity amongst our service providers in providing both biosecurity measures as well as the pharmaceutical interventions, which are standard disease control measures which are existing currently. So I think that's my last slide. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Betts, for your presentation. I will now give the floor to our third panelist of this section on solutions, Mr. Hernan Villalobos. He's Corporate Manager of Climate Change and Renewable Energies at Arcos Dorados with offices in Costa Rica. He has a background in renewable energies and climate change from the University of Costa Rica as well. Mr. Villalobos, I will give you the floor for the next 10 minutes. Let me know if you can hear me and you can start your presentation.
Hello, thank you for the time. I'll share my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, we want to thank Gals, Gals and Katia for this event, for invited us. It's a pleasure to be here. And we want to, our presentation will be a little bit different than the others because we represent the end of the change in the livestock system. So as already been said, I'm living in Costa Rica. I have been working in climate change projects for the last 14 years. And I work for Arcos Dorados. We are the chain that operate more than 2,000 restaurants in whole Latin America. We have restaurants from Mexico to Argentina. We have 20 countries, and one data that I think is important here for dimension, more than 4 million customers per day. We serve food in all our markets. And we have been growing in the region, and we are now near 100,000 employees. We are our main force is young employers with less than 24 years old. And I put this data here because all the changes that are happening right now, even our employees, our clients are demanding that we take actions on how we supply our food and our resources. So I want to say that we have a recipe for the future, and we have different pillars in that recipe for the future. That is our environmental and social engagement strategy. And one of those pillars is sustainable sourcing. In sustainable sourcing, we work in very strongly in animal health and welfare. As been mentioned here, we work with the WOAH, the World Organization of Animal Health standards, and we use the WHO standards, also the guidelines that have been set for animal welfare, and all our 100% of our slaughterhouses are being audited annually, and all of them have been successfully completed the process. We also work with in our dairy products, we use standards for animal care and wholesome oat milk. We are committed in our supply chain that 100% of our eggs will be cage-free eggs by 2025. Now in Costa Rica, since 2022, all our eggs are cage-free. Also, recently, all our Brazilian market, Colombia and Peru have all cage-free eggs. So we are committed to move forward in that area. And we have a very strong work in assure the origin of our beef. And we have a very strong deforestation-free policy. We are oriented in know where our beef is coming from, and we trace 100% of the beef that is coming from our direct suppliers. And we are the only quick service restaurant that has developed and fully implemented the deforestation-free beef procurement policy for 3 biomes, for the Amazon, the Cerrado, and the Chaco. We implement this deforestation-free policy, and we use remote and satellite monitoring for all the farms that are providing us the livestock, so we can see if there have been some deforestation in those areas. And what you can see here for the Chaco is that we develop a risk map tool, so we can see where is high level or low level or risk for our suppliers. And we have been committed more than 99.9% of our beef suppliers commit that this policy. Our partners in this work are AgroTools and Proforest. They are helping us develop the remote and satellite monitoring. Also, as you all may know, we are addressing this not only for the climate change and biodiversity loss that is created through deforestation, because also we have known that the deforestation can increases the disease and public health problems. So we know that addressing this deforestation issue in Brazil and Argentina, we are also working in health problems, trying to stop health issues. We also work in the round tables of sustainable beef. We lead the stakeholders in conversations. We are actively promote continuous development to support a more sustainable practice and science-based production. In Argentina, we are part of the MAX, is the Mesa Argentina of Carne Sustentable. We are part of this roundtable and on the steering committee. In Brazil, we are part of the Brazilian roundtable, and we are part of the board there. And those two roundtables are part of the global roundtable sustainable beef that we also are part of. We participate on several groups with them. Okay, so our address to diseases and to sustainable sourcing is our path to secure our sourcing and also help and restore environments and biomes that are at risk. And one great example that this sustainable sourcing and sustainable practice have been a great success is here in Costa Rica. We have been working with all the stakeholders in the supply chains to promote Nama Ganadería with recent verification for the stock of carbon in the field. And it has been a great experience working with the whole chain and see all the efforts. Costa Rica have decreased, not only decreased the deforestation, has increased reforestation through the years, and these type of programs have been helping improve the GHG sequestration through rotational grazing. And due to our participation in this scheme, we have put in contact all the actors in the supply chains so they can improve practice like rotational grazing. We have been working alongside with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Institute of Technology for Agriculture. And we know there have been a lot of examples of great management and environmental improvement about the use of this practice. And also we know that the health of the animal has been is better with these practices because you move the graze with this rotational grazing through the through the farm, and also increases the water management. And instead of going to the river to drink water and create a vector of contamination, you have different stages of water in the farm, and also increase the productivity and helps the adaptation and resilience to climate change. So it has been a pleasure working with the whole change, and we are trying to create this kind of synergy with the whole change in all the markets, taking the example of Costa Rica that is doing a great work here. And for us, I want to thank again to the Gulf, for the invitation. We invite us to see our recipe for the future, where we have all the initiatives related to sustainable sourcing, and also to our different environmental and social topics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hernan. With that, we conclude the first section of this panel of solutions on the drivers of health and disease. We would like also to share with you now some of the other questions on the Slido. We will now introduce a new question, and we kindly ask you to help us provide in one idea, as difficult as that might be, on a possible pathway for improving the current livestock systems, considering the health and disease drivers that affect those. Your suggestions will be considered for building collective actions. So through the chat, you will be able to find this question. We will now have a very short break, just 5 minutes. We will be showing a video on CATIE so that you have more information on this institution. And we will be returning as soon as this video finalizes.
In 2023, we are celebrating 50 years of providing solutions for inclusive green development. These are our main contributions. Since our inception in 1973, we have been committed to sustainable development, working to enhance human well-being and alleviate poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our main lines of action to achieve this have been research, education, and outreach. With these lines of action, we have innovated in the integration of agriculture and the management, conservation, and sustainable use of natural resources. We promote the approach of agroforestry, which currently covers at least 200 million hectares in Latin America and the Caribbean. We create and distribute hybrid F1, selected varieties of coffee and cocoa clones that stand out for their high productivity, resilience to diseases, and excellent quality. Together with the Association of Forest Communities of Pitin, we have pioneered the forest concession model. This model represents one of the most successful global examples of sustainable management of tropical forests. Our forest seed bank distributes its products to more than 47 countries worldwide. It currently ranks as one of the leading seed suppliers in Latin America. For the past 10 years, we have generated scientific evidence on the importance of blue carbon, making us pioneers in this field. Our research has allowed us to strengthen the schemes of payment for environmental services for the benefit of countries in Latin America. We develop plans for the proper management of water and soil, thereby contributing to the mitigation and adaptation of populations to climate change and extreme and recurring weather events. In our germplasm bank, we preserve more than 6,000 crop seeds for global food security. We demonstrate that the implementation of silvopastoral systems and other best livestock practices make sustainable, low-emission livestock farming viable. Through our botanical garden, hundreds of tourists from around the globe gain insights into tropical biodiversity. We have trained over 2,800 young people to become masters and leaders for change who are presently addressing the needs and challenges of the countries in the region. We have constructed a scientific and cooperation platform maintaining relationships with more than 400 partners. We organized the 8th Wallace Scientific Conference, which set the roadmap for transforming food systems in Latin America and the Caribbean. We had 170 participants from 20 countries, 12 high-level speakers, and the results of 100 research studies were shared to establish strategies towards sustainable, fair, and nutritious food systems.
Cuando nos acercamos a los 50 años del CATIE, lo que tenemos que hacer es redoblar los esfuerzos, pensar en el mandato histórico de esta institución y la necesidad de seguir generando y formando líderes que tienen desde las diferentes instituciones que ocupan, contribuir a la transformación de la agricultura de los trópicos, donde hay problemas de productividad, de sostenibilidad, donde necesitamos agregar valor, necesitamos incorporar a los jóvenes y a las mujeres.
Muchísimas gracias, ¿verdad? Una felicitación a nuestro querido director, don Mohamed Ibrahim, ¿verdad? Que siempre está dispuesto a colaborar y a facilitarnos todo lo que hemos puesto en el camino para darle un mejor servicio a la comunidad.
And I would like to wish CATIE a very happy 50th birthday. Under the direction of DG Ibrahim, I've gotten to see firsthand some of the transformational work that CATIE, together with its partners, has achieved in the region for the benefit of both people and nature.
We are steadfast in our commitment to continue contributing to inclusive green development and the transformation of agri-food systems.
Welcome back, everyone. We will now continue to the second panel for this webinar. Before we move on to this panel, I would like to remind you that we have the question on the Slido. We have received some first impressions on drivers and solutions, so please feel free to keep on commenting as we move on to our next panel discussion. Also, we would like to encourage you to participate in the chat, but also in the last section of this webinar, we will be having direct interaction with the panelists. You are able to interact with these panelists either through the chat, but we will also allow people to interact through video live. So if you would like to interact, you can raise your hand and we will be giving you the word for about 30 seconds so that we can hear your impressions, your questions. You can make these questions either in English or in Spanish. So if you would like, you can use either one of those languages for your questions. Solo para recordarles que en la sección final vamos a tener la posibilidad de participar en vivo con los panelistas, para lo cual pueden hacer preguntas en español en caso de que así lo deseen. Now we will move on to the second panel on these interesting and expert on health and disease drivers. For this panel, we will have first Mr. Rodrigo de Souza Costa. He works at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. He has a degree from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and since 2010 to date, he's specialist in dairy cattle management at DSM. Mr. Rodrigo, I will give you the word now for the next 10 minutes, and I will let you know through the chat when you have 5 minutes left. Mr. de Souza? Okay, I believe we're having issues with the connection for Mr. de Souza. So we will proceed with our next panelist in the meantime, Mr. Alex Rincus, Director of Communications and Stakeholder Engagement at Health for Animals. Health for Animals represents developers and manufacturers of animal health products, including vaccines, diagnostics, parasitides, antibiotics, digital technologies, and other tools that improve the health and well-being of animals. Members include the 10 largest global animal health companies, as well as 28 regional and national associations across the world. Alex joins Health for Animals in 2016, following positions in agriculture, biotechnology, and nanotechnology sectors. Mr. Rinkus, you now have the word, the floor for 10 minutes, and I will let you know when you have 5 minutes left.
Wonderful. And I assume you can see my presentation and hear me correctly?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to participate today. I very much appreciate the opportunity and very much appreciate the opportunity to provide the animal health sector's perspective on livestock health and disease trends. We've heard a number of good presentations today, so hopefully we can add a valuable voice into this discussion. So as Mariel said, my name is Alex Rinkus. I am the Director of Communications and Stakeholder Relations for Health for Animals. We are the Global Animal Health Association. We are based in Brussels, Belgium. I personally work in Washington, DC, but we have a quite robust global presence as that global association. So we represent the 10 largest animal health companies worldwide. You see them listed there. I'm sure there are names that many folks are familiar with. And from that relationship with our member companies, we have connection to over 100 countries around the world through them, as well as through our member associations. We have 29 across the globe working in, this is actually a little bit out of date, but it says here 50 countries. It's continuing to grow every single year with presence in key markets, as you can see here, everywhere from the US to Brazil, to Argentina, to China, to Australia, to the EU, etc., as well as what's not represented on this map as it's some new expansion in the last year or so, but a significantly growing presence in the Middle East and North Africa, as well as in areas of sub-Saharan Africa. So it luckily gives us some good perspective on kind of what are those key health challenges, whether that's in developed or developing regions, and kind of what are some of the solutions that our industry is looking at and what we are seeing partners looking at as well. Now, our mission as that Global Animal Health Association, as the representatives of the animal health sector, is really fivefold. We focus on 5 core issues of societal importance: sustainability, animal welfare, access to veterinary care, human-animal bond, and One Health. But really, we see underpinning all 5 of those key issue areas, one key mantra, which is this: health for animals improves health for all. We know when animals are healthier, it means people are healthier, environment is healthier, and the world is generally a healthier place. So the more we can advance the health for animals, the more we can advance society at large. However, unfortunately, we do see in recent years the effects of animal disease growing across the world. So I'm sure folks have seen the World Organization for Animal Health has often estimated that approximately 20% of livestock production right now is lost to disease each year. But that is even just a global average there. When we go into specific markets or specific regions, we can see that rising even higher. For instance, in developing regions, we see it as high as 50%. That's a statistic from the International Livestock Research Institute when looking at poultry production in developing regions. And we see some of these global phenomenons like climate change exacerbating that even further. Parasites are a great example where we are seeing parasites that once thrived in more southern latitudes, able to move further and further north as temperature rises, as climate change has that impact. And what we see is an enormous effect upon sustainability due to these impacts of animal disease and due to these rising effects. And we see it really across 3 key pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social sustainability. So livestock disease at a global level, that 20% loss, the World Bank has estimated that results in approximately $300 billion in lost production each year. When you compare that to the GDP of countries, that's approximately 40th worldwide in terms of the GDP of entire countries, close to the entire gross domestic product of a country like South Africa. From an environmental perspective, every animal lost to disease or animals that fall sick and are ultimately able to produce less means a higher GHG footprint for that herd level output. And so we see, for instance, for beef, cattle disease increasing emissions up to 113%, and for dairy production up to 24%, depending upon the disease affecting that herd. And from a social perspective, the downstream impacts comes around when we look at, for instance, food and nutrition security. Some modeling work that was published earlier this year, looking at diseases in 2019, found that poultry disease in particular was associated with a 5% hunger increase globally in 2019. 5% may not sound large, but when we look at that at actual people, that's 34 million more people going hungry due to poultry disease alone in 2019. Now, what that means, though, is obviously we have significant impacts upon sustainability due to animal disease, but that also means we have an opportunity to address livestock health and really look to bring some of those proven solutions to the table. So on the flip side, when we look economically, just taking that 20% losses that are each year, bringing that down by 1 percentage point to 19%, 1 percentage point to 18%, the increase in production is enough, for instance, in beef cattle, to meet the average consumption needs of 300 million people, according to modeling that was done earlier this year. On an environmental side, the FAO published a great report in around 2015, 2016, that found that just simply increasing the adoption of existing technologies and practices in health, husbandry, and genetics could reduce livestock emissions by 30%. And from that social perspective, again, when we look at better health, for instance, in a country like Nigeria, modeling that was published found that a 40% vaccination rate there for cattle was associated with an approximate 8% reduction in severe food insecurity. So if we can bring better health to the table at a global level, we can see significant impacts upon the sustainability of livestock production. But unfortunately, when we look at some of these disease drivers and we look at the downstream impacts, we see animal health as really a underutilized sustainability solution. The FAO published a report last year, you see here, on the role of animal health and national climate commitments, and found that the importance of animal health is really not currently reflected in both climate strategies and those nationally determined contributions that are driving the Paris Agreement at the moment. And as a result, when we look at these sort of after action calculations, when we look at major disease outbreaks, we are as a result still seeing significant sustainability impacts. So loss in production due to something like African swine fever, harming livelihoods, and same for foot and mouth year in, year out. But again, those downstream impacts on public health as well for something like a salmonella that continues to lead to foodborne illness each year and zoonotic disease overall. But again, it is an underutilized sustainability solution when looking at animal health, but we have the tools available. It is just about getting it in the hands of more veterinarians, more livestock keepers, and to more animals. And what we always like to say is, animal health solutions, they are both high tech and scale neutral. So there are opportunities to increase the adoption of these products across all markets worldwide. So for a developed market, one with more sophisticated frameworks, more sophisticated veterinary infrastructure, there are opportunities to, for instance, improve biosecurity around some of the new digital technologies that are coming to market, better opportunities to trace products as they go from farm to fork. But even when we look at developing regions, areas like Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, where the average livestock keeper may only have a few head of cattle, there are still significant opportunities to implement those scale neutral technologies like vaccination, like genetics, like parasite control, et cetera, to improve those smallholder farmers' operations as well. Now, with my limited time left, I really want to touch on what we see as really needing to change to make animal health that recognized sustainability solution and get it better integrated in nationally determined contributions and action plans on climate. And we look at this in 3 ways. First and foremost is simply recognition. As the FAO stated in their report last year, it is just not currently recognized by countries well enough as a proven sustainability solution and something that needs to be recognized in climate strategies. That is the utmost goal when it comes to animal health in terms of getting this better integrated. The second is access. That includes both pathways to market and regulatory regimes, but also simply the availability of veterinary expertise, particularly in developing regions. WOA published their observatory last year that found that when you look at a market like Europe versus a market like Africa, the ratio of animals to veterinarians in Africa is 6 times larger than Europe, meaning that the coverage of veterinarians in an area like that is much, much lower. And that makes it exceedingly difficult at times to deliver particularly those preventative animal health solutions in those emerging markets. And finally is around support. We see emerging products around areas like methane reduction or existing products around things like salmonella that provide wider benefits for society, but may not actually provide benefits for the productivity levels of livestock. And we need to consider, how do we support adoption of those types of products where the farmer is not seeing direct benefit, but wider society is. So with that, I know my time is coming to a close, but I want to highlight a couple areas that I've touched on today where you can get more information, where I'm pulling some of these statistics from and such. The first is a report that came out earlier this year, Animal Health and Sustainability, a Global Data Analysis. We commissioned this from a research and analysis firm, Oxford Analytica in the UK, that did a significant amount of modeling on those effects of animal disease and opportunities for control. You can see the link there, but as well as that report I mentioned from the FAO last year around the role of animal health in national climate commitments that really outlines how countries can better integrate it into their strategies. So certainly encourage folks to take a look at those. So with that, I will wrap up. I know my time has come to a close, but certainly happy to take any questions during the Q&A period. Thank you, Mariel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rincos. We will indeed be able to discuss some of the points that you have raised in the Q&A section. Before we continue with the next panelist, I would like to remind everyone that we still have the Slido platform open. We would encourage you to continue participating with one idea on possible pathways for improving the current livestock system, considering some of the issues that we have seen so far on health and disease drivers. So far, we have received several answers, as you can see here, the comments on biosecurity, the establishment on collaborative and technological-driven livestock health surveillance networks, interesting issues here on collaboration of public-private producer partnerships. Also through the comments I've seen there's some discussion also on this private-public relationship that indeed needs to be kept in providing solutions. And of course, I see several comments here on climate change, which I think is a transversal topic that some of you have mentioned so far. Also, I would like to remind everyone that we are live through our Facebook and YouTube channels for Katie and Gasol. So you will find the information in the chat and you can follow us there on our social media as well. I will now continue by introducing our next speaker. Mr. Jonathan Rushton is Professor of Animal Health and Food System Economics at the Institute of Infection, Veterinary and Ecological Service at the University of Liverpool. Mr. Rushton is an agricultural economist who specializes in the economics of animal health and food systems. His principal research interests are the global burden of animal diseases, where he directs a global program with the WOAH, economics of antimicrobial use and resistance in livestock, and assessments of the multidimensionality of food quality and public health. Mr. Rushton, you now have the floor for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invite to talk today. I'm giving this presentation on behalf of quite a large consortium actually working on the global burden of animal diseases. And what I'm going to emphasize here is, while we have some data, we don't really have enough data to make some of the refined decisions that we would like to take. But also because the data that we have is not that great, actually building business cases for the kind of investments that Alex has just talked about is quite difficult. You've already got an introduction for me, but as I say, I'm presenting this on behalf of quite a large consortium. I want to start with a quote, which I think everybody sort of emphasized, but diseases have affected economies, both demographic pressures and a changed supply and hence price of labor, and by its effect on productivity of a particular regional group. Diseases' intellectual and cultural effects have far-reaching and profound effects. It has channeled individual creativity and may occasionally stamp its optimism and pessimism on an entire age. I think given that we've been through COVID-19, we can see that, but if you go back in history, things like the plague shaped labor prices, things like rinderpest created huge problems across Africa and probably have remaining issues in Africa, and also spurned the creation of an international organization like the World Organization of Animal Health. So we react to diseases in certain ways. And yet, when we come to animal decision making, when we actually went out and asked people, and this is a survey done with Delia Grace, we find that people are unsure about how we're doing that decision making. We think it's unfair. We think it's based on guesses. It's opaque. It's not very friendly. There's no metrics that actually represent what we're thinking about when we're thinking about animal disease making. So what do we really know about burden? Well, we tend to focus very hard on the health losses, the kinds of things that we like to put out, the big numbers in terms of the visible losses of people dying or animals dying. There are some invisible losses that are caused on farms, that farms have to dig into the data to actually understand more carefully. But we don't tend to leave diseases in that kind of sort of situation. We tend to react to those things. We react by investments in vaccines or antibiotics. We invest in disease control programs. And the overall burden is a mix of these two things. Now, on one side, we have this impact caused specifically by the diseases and health problems that we face in the large animal populations we hold. And on the other side, we have the impacts caused by human reaction. Some of those might be trade related, but they're largely related to our reactions in terms of investment in disease control. From an economic perspective, and I think it's really important we do take an economic perspective, every time we spend $1 or £1 or €1 on that control issue, we're anticipating we're going to avert at least $1 in terms of that loss of production. And getting the balance right between the two is quite a challenge. It depends a lot on the prices we put on different things. As Alex referred to, some of the things that we do at farm level will not create benefits. So we have to think very carefully about societal and private drivers in terms of taking that forward. So what are we trying to do with the Global Burden of Animal Disease Program? Well, we're trying to actually provide information about what do we currently spend and what do we currently lose in terms of production. Now, we have gaps in our data systems internationally. We can tell you how much is being spent on pet health, but we can't tell people what's being spent on livestock health. So there is a global database held by the World Bank, which actually allows you to look at pet health expenditure, but there's no equivalent for livestock health. And that's actually quite a big gap in terms of our understanding and our ability to say very much about where we've got gaps in expenditure issues. Of course, we can use proxies as WOA are doing with regards the numbers of vets we have in society, but that doesn't necessarily always reflect the investments we're making on education and research, and also the coordination of larger programs. On the flip side, the loss of productions, yeah, we've got some information, but it tends to be sort of hit and miss. So we're trying to create a data structure which allows us to say something more carefully about this overall picture of expenditure and loss. And we'd also like to actually provide that information over time. Obviously, if we've got it over time, we've got a better idea about where there's an imbalance between the two, but also where things are growing or shrinking, where we need to think about reaction. And with this kind of longitudinal data set, we will have the ability to some extent to actually understand the value of some of our policies that as we change subsidies on, say, animal health issues, but also subsidies on the way we keep livestock. Currently, again, we do not have this kind of longitudinal data set available to actually do that. And then the final thing really is actually allowing us to disaggregate that information by region, also by country, and then obviously into disaggregation by different socioeconomic groups, so we can say something a little bit more concrete about that. Now, what I'm presenting here is very much a vision about where we're moving towards. GBADS has been ongoing as a sort of idea and a vision for the last 2 or 3 years. We've actually done some field work and we're doing estimations for Ethiopia, and I encourage you to look at what we're actually achieving in that realm. And the power of the information we're generating is the need to actually identify where animal health investments are actually inadequate. We do not have the data systems in place to actually do that at the moment. We need to think very carefully about where investments are actually badly allocated. So we tend to focus very hard on infectious disease burdens, but we totally miss the fact that there's health issues around animals that might die because of flooding or drought or through fires. We need to have systems where we can evaluate past animal health policies and projects. So again, longitudinal data sets allow us to do that. And if we're going to make evaluations of future investments, then having data in a systematic fashion actually allows us better evaluation of those future investments. And of course, if we're heading towards these sustainable development goals, then we do need better mapping of where we've got animal health investments and how we're achieving those sustainable development goals. So where have we come to today? We've got an agreed framework and a prototype set of dashboards. Again, if you look down at the slide at the bottom with regards our web page site, please go there, you'll find those dashboards. We've tested that framework in Ethiopia. We've got quite a lot of ongoing work in Europe, and we're starting to do case study work in Indonesia, Senegal, and with Dr. Luis Barcos, we're in the process of initiating work in the southern cone of South America. And we've initiated discussions with China and India, where we're also engaging with them with regards looking at the burden of diseases in two of the biggest livestock keeping countries in the world. So that's a map of our current coverage of areas that we're working on with some degree of intensity. And as I say, this is an ongoing piece of work where we're rolling out through a process of developing collaborating centres, WOA collaborating centres on the economics of animal health. We've established one in Europe. We've got one initiating in the Americas, and we're discussing how we do something similar for Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. So coming back to our analytical framework, we're working very hard on pulling together decent livestock population data. That might be something you think is readily available. It's not as easily available as you would imagine. We're estimating the biomass and the value of those animals and their output. We're then calculating a gap analysis, which will actually allow us to look at that loss of production and the expenditure issues. And then we're attributing that by disease cause or health problems or accidents to actually understand the absolute burden of those cause issues and also the relative burden. And finally, we're looking more carefully at how that impacts the economy. So we have a very strong focus at the moment in terms of estimating the farm level burden of disease. And then we're looking very carefully at what does that mean in terms of economy change, producer and consumer surplus issues, and overall economic efficiencies. These are some of the data that we pulled together to date with Ethiopia. That there are early estimates, we'll probably refine them further. But you can see that in a country that's marked as being poor, they have nearly $40 billion invested in animals alone. And we reckon that they're possibly losing, and it seems a bit of a strange figure because it's almost the value of the animals themselves, $26 billion in terms of mortality, morbidity, and expenditure. But there is a big imbalance between what's being spent and what's currently estimated to be lost in this particular system. When we are actually trying to attribute that by species, we think there's probably about $3 billion loss in sheep and goats, which could be attributed to infectious diseases, non-infectious diseases, and external forces. And you'll note that half of that loss is probably not in the infectious disease area. It's in areas where we need to think more carefully about how animals are managed and how animals are affected by predation or injuries and accidents. We've then used that information into economy models, general equilibrium models and partial equilibrium models. And the losses we're looking at, just because of the presence of poor animal health states, are in the region of 5% of GDP. If we shift that, don't expect a big benefit to come to producers. As we all know, if we improve technology at farm level, it often translates into benefits for consumers. And this is probably going to be the case with the animal health world. We need to get that message back across to decision makers who think that we should not potentially be funding certain problems because it's not a benefit to society. In fact, it is a benefit to consumers, and we're all consumers. And there could well be trade implications for a country like Ethiopia that's got strong links with other parts of East Africa. So this is a kind of framework we are working on. We're pulling data together at national and global level at the moment, moving all the way to thinking about what does it mean in terms of expenditure, production loss, trade, and the disability adjusted life years that's captured in the human health thing that's working with us. We're for providing information about impacts, health losses, how it's distributed, the process of developing materials documentation, codes of practice developed in coordination with WOA. Now, coming back to the One Health area, we work closely with the global burden of human disease, and we're also working closely with the global burden of crop loss, which is based in CABI. There are linkages across these different programs. So obviously, anything that happens in terms of zoonotic, food safety, or nutritional impacts has a role of thinking about how we look at global burden of human disease. We're taking very much a food systems approach, and we're thinking about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in terms of food supply, business and employment, and also the need to have high quality and safe food to actually ensure good health and well-being. We need a lens with regards gender equality, and we mustn't forget that actually our livestock are kept in a wider environmental space. We want to capture better data, and it's something that we can't really do. Contact us. We want to start to sign data alliances with people who've got good data on animal health or livestock production, and we want to actually sort of encourage the development of young people actually doing these estimations to a fine level, which will actually lead to better decision making overall. Just a quick acknowledgement to all the people working on this program, and also a thank you to the team at CATIA for pulling this together. Okay, I'll return you back to the CATIA team.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rushton. For all of you who have been asking also in the chat, just to let you know that these webinars are being recorded in our social media, which you will be able to access both the seminar that we had on Tuesday, today's session, and also the one that we'll have next Monday. Also, all presentations will be uploaded in a repository that we have for the 13th GASL MSP meeting, and you will be able to also access that at a later time. Thank you very much so far to all of the panelists for your insightful presentations. We will now proceed to the elements of discussion and Q&A and interaction. We encourage all of the panelists who have intervened so far to feel free to participate at this time. We are also joined by Mr. Danilo Peso, who is a lecturer and consultant on livestock and environmental management at CATIA and co-editor on Tropical Grasslands Journal, who will be joining us in analyzing the key elements of this session. To the panelists, we would appreciate your observations on a set of pre-prepared questions that we have for you. We will be interacting also with the questions people have in the chat. And if someone would like also to pose a question through audio, you can raise your hand in the webinar platform and we will be giving the word to each one who participates. I will be posing 3 questions and then we will move on with Mr. Danilo, who will be giving us a little bit more insight on the topics that we have discussed today. The first question is on the impact of health and disease on livelihood of producers, mainly emerging diseases, and what can we do to reduce their impact. The second one is on livestock health and disease trends and their link to human health and markets, so from a food systems approach. And what are the challenges in the framework of sustainable livestock? With this, I will give now the word to Mr. Danilo Peso. Mr. Danilo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mariel. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be participating in this webinar, and thank to all the key speaker and the panelists for their contributions. I just want to make a few comments based on the presentations and based on the experience that we have lived in the last few years regarding these emerging diseases. I think in 2020, we have this COVID pandemic that changed the mind not only of scientists, people really in the field, but also the perception of the whole public on the importance of these emerging diseases. Just want to remember that immediately after the pandemic in 2021, the United Nations Environment Program and ILRI produced a document that is very, very interesting in terms of how to attack these zoonotic diseases. And one of the things that came out of this pandemic and many of the documents and the reactions of the different stakeholders was the importance of the One Health approach. It has been mentioned in this webinar, that concept, and actually that is new. That is not new. I think in the 19th century there were the starting of the concepts of One Health, but it took more importance, I think, in the last few years, and even many institutions, including CATIE, has this approach, the One Health approach, as part of its strategic plan for 2021 to 2030. In that document, the authors mention some of the drivers of diseases. And the first thing is the increase in human demand for animal source foods, the unsustainable agricultural intensification, the increased use and exploitation of wildlife, the unsustainable use of natural resources, the increased travel and transportation, changes in the food supply, and climate change exacerbating the effect of diseases. And some of these topics have been covered along these different presentations, the keynote speaker presentation and the reactions of the panelists. And one of the things that comes out of all these presentations, besides the very valuable information that we have received from the different participants, is the importance of collective action of all stakeholders in the different nodes of the livestock value chains regarding these points: vaccine development, new diagnostic technologies, alternatives to antibiotics, biosecurity measures, the need for social and economic impact studies, the sharing of data and information and education materials on all these topics, and the development of digital tools to enhance the veterinary service delivery, particularly in the more remote rural areas. These things, I think, are a good point for discussion and for thinking on what are the next steps on this topic of animal diseases. Just want to mention two additional things that came from three additional things that came from the presentations. The first one is taking Dr. Rushton's call on the need for developing and encouraging new generation of professionals for the control of non-regulated diseases and the One Health approach. The second one was the mission of Health for Animals by Mr. Rinkas, where he emphasizes on the support of sustainable livestock production, paying attention to animal welfare, the increased access to the veterinary care or veterinary services, reinforce the animal people bond, and strengthen the One Health approach again. And the third thing that I want to emphasize is the participation of the private sector. No, but I want to refer to the contribution of Mr. Villalobos, no, who was clear on showing us the role, the business, the company where he is part of, on requirements for providers for products that come from, for example, beef coming from deforested free areas, from systems that take care of animal health and welfare. In the case, for example, of the eggs coming from non-caged chicken and so on. Then all these are the very interesting points that have been raised along these presentations. And I guess with this, I think there will be many other questions for the presenters this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. And I pass the word to Mariel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peso. And perhaps I would like to begin this question and answer dynamic with one of the last points you mentioned on public-private partnerships, because we have also received some comments and questions about this in our Slido. And I would perhaps like to get some impressions from our panelists. If you would like to comment on this, you can raise your hand, perhaps specifically on examples, case studies, or references to situations where you can see an effective implementation of these partnerships. Okay, perfect. Yes, Mr. Barcos, you have the floor.
Yes, well, I like to mention something about the private-public partnership. In our organization, we developed the guidelines for good implementation of private-public partnership, and also we make assess to what are the different public-private partnership model in animal health in different parts of the world. We detect more than 250 public-private partnership organizations that are working, and all this information are in our website in English, French, and Spanish, and any person could be used, and also could contact specific examples of PPP in different areas. And well, I think the inclusion of the private sector in PPP doesn't mean privatization, because I saw some message in the chat. We don't promote privatization. We promote the coordinated work between the private and public sector. This is our proposal, because in many cases give sustainability along the time for the different actions and activities, in particular in animal health.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting, this public-private partnership. Perhaps if you can comment or one specific example in the country, maybe in Argentina or in a country that you've worked with.
Well, for example, I like to mention examples in Uruguay. Uruguay was developed the compensation mechanism jointly between the private and public sector, and they decide the amount of money that they collect per animal and allocate this money in the specific account. They can the decision to use and deliver the compensation system is under the rules established in partnership between the private and public sector. This is one example. We have another examples in the application of FMD vaccine in many South American countries, that another vaccine too. And we have examples in the Parafiscal Fund in Colombia that have a legal framework for collect money for specific activities by animal species. They have Parafiscal Fund in pork, poultry, and cattle, and they use for animal health, promotion of activities, and so on. We have other examples in antibiotic resistance. Well, you can see in the website more than 250 examples about this.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Barcos. Perhaps I would like to link this question with another one, another topic we mentioned before. But before I continue, anyone who has a question, you can do it through the chat in writing, but also you can raise your hand and we will give you the space to interact. Mr. Rincos, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I can add a little on the public-private partnership perspective, obviously speaking from that, private sector point of view. But from our sector perspective, I mean, we certainly see public-private partnerships as a critical tool, particularly in, developing regions and areas where, for instance, in a sub-Saharan Africa, where veterinary services are often a public workforce, and the majority of veterinarians are employed by the government, by the state, et cetera. So, delivering care and understanding the challenges on the ground of those regions requires working with governments, requires working with public institutions and understanding what those challenges are. A good example of that is a project from one of our member companies. It's called the Alpha Project. It's being done by a global animal health company in concert with the Gates Foundation and a number of governments in sub-Saharan Africa. But one of the impetuses of that project was really understanding what are some of the veterinary health framework gaps that exist? And one of the key ones that was identified was really a lack of diagnostics reference laboratories. That was really an element that was kind of holding back veterinary care in some regions, actually understanding, what are some of the diseases being faced, what are the disease pressures, et cetera. So as a result, our company and in conjunction with the Gates Foundation was able to work with public institutions, universities down there, et cetera, to begin establishing some of those diagnostics reference laboratories that really can be used to better understand disease pressures and the movement of diseases as a result. Another kind of key way, and Luis started alluding to this a bit around FMD, but some of the work around vaccine banks in particular around the world is a critical public-private partnership. One of the key differences between the animal health sector and the human health sector that's often a little not well understood is the lack of slack that exists in our production system. So animal health medicine production is often planned many years in advance. The ability to sort of do quick reactions when major outbreaks occur is not nearly as feasible in our sector when compared to something like human health that does have a little bit more of that slack in their production. So understanding what governments need in terms of tackling a disease like FMD, or we also see this with rabies in East Africa and South Asia, understanding what they're going to need in the years ahead, making sure we can supply that and we can build up those vaccine banks really allows us to work towards eradication in some areas and react better to outbreaks when they occur. And again, that interaction with the public sector in that planning process is absolutely essential. So yeah, so from our perspective, public-private partnerships are a huge part of our work in some of these areas. Thank you, Mariel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rincos. Perhaps I would like to link this to another question and perhaps direct this to Mr. Rushton. You mentioned a challenge on data. Perhaps if you would like to comment on this specifically on how maybe this public-private alliances could provide a solution to the lack of data you were commenting on before.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I would say that most of our animal health data in a very detailed sense is not held by the public sector. We have ongoing diseases which is very much sort of directed by organizations like WOA, but the day-to-day endemic diseases that we have ongoing tend to be held in private sector data sets, and they capture things like sample taking, diagnostics, etc. Plus there is information there about production of animals, their growth rates, their production of milk, their production of eggs, etc. It's a combination of that health data and that production data which would allow us to look more carefully at the actual impact of diseases, both in terms of growth, but also mortality issues. So I do think we need to think very carefully about who collects data, how they hold it, what value could we actually add on to that data to actually look more refined estimates. So for me, one of the key aspects of the GBADS program is thinking about those data alliances between public and private sector sources and making sure we're making the best use of it. I understand that there's very great difficulties in terms of commercial sensitivity of some of those data, and we've got to be careful about how we use it. We are working with an experienced data science team who can give us some guarantees about data security, and we can discuss how we absorb those data and don't actually publicize any individual companies, etc. And I also recognize that we're working in a very tricky area where, you know, we'll have groups who want to twist the kinds of things we do against us. So we have to be careful about how we're doing this. We've had discussions about how we've named our project. People see burden as being a very negative thing. But what we want to do is actually highlight where there are opportunities for investments. And we can only do that properly if we've actually got better quality data. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rushton. Mr. Peso, do you have any questions so far for the panelists?
Okay, yes. One of the problems that we face in the developing world is the access to veterinary services in the more remote areas. Does any one of you have experience or information on the use of the digital tools for providing diagnostics and veterinary recommendations to the public? For example, the role that may have this community veterinarian, in quotations, people in those communities?
Would any of the panelists like to comment on this?
I can try, and then
yes, go ahead.
So yes, you are right. You know, there are many projects which have trained either community health volunteers. Nowadays, they are called community health promoters, or even community animal health reporters. In other places, they are called community animal health workers. So I know they have been equipped with the tools which, you know, they can capture syndromic surveillance data sets. But one of the key challenges that we still confront is authorities justifying or using that data for official reporting. That's where usually there's a kind of a how do I put it? Because I think the national authorities are tuned to report to WOHA and other institutions which really require confirmed information on disease presence. And if you were to rely on reported syndromic surveillance, then it couldn't be entered into those databases. So we find ourselves in the middle ground where we encourage continued generation of that data to be used as early warning messages, which can then be followed up with veterinarians for confirmatory purposes. So I agree with you, those opportunities are there to have these community workers relaying data sets so that then it can be used to inform some response. And those responses in many times involve confirmatory diagnosis with qualified veterinarians. So that's that. I also wanted, let me just take a second to respond to private public partnership. There's a plan we have been trying to quantify, assess here in East Africa, where public veterinarians, whenever they are doing vaccination campaigns, they are expected by farmers, sometimes pastoralists, to also provide clinical services. So they are also expected to provide things like dewormers, tick, caricides, and all those. So in other places, what they have done is to encourage the private sector to accompany them and meet farmers who are coming in for vaccination, because at that point, you actually get large volumes of farmers who can purchase products which are delivered by the private sector. So it can come up to be a very nice private public partnership, because the government will be providing vaccines, but the private sector will be supplying the additional products for curative services. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bett. And I think we have here Mr. Rushton. You would also like to comment on this?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, I'm going back 15 years of doing kind of issues in Bolivia before these kind of new technologies existed. I think one of the critical things is matching the diagnostics against what's the offering for therapeutics or active disease management. So the supply chains of veterinary technologies become absolutely critical. And if you've got diagnostics that are going to be very expensive to apply in the field and actually slow, then we've got to be quite careful how we sort of manage that process in these rural settings. So sometimes a clinical diagnosis might be as good as we can do. We can only get good clinical diagnosis if we've actually trained the right people in that situation. And even sample taking, I think, needs very careful thought about how do we train people to take samples, and how do we actually then train people to store them properly and send them appropriately to actually get better diagnostics. So this needs kind of linking to capacity development of the people actually in the field and working hard to make a difference at that kind of level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rushton. Mr. Rinkus?
Thank you. I'll just kind of build on what Jonathan and Bernard said, just to say, you know, from our perspective as that animal health sector, you know, we see increased access to veterinary care as the greatest challenge for us over the next 10 years in terms of, you know, increasing animal health, improving livestock health at a global level. You know, without that, I believe we will struggle in certain emerging markets and developing regions on taking on issues like you know, not just sustainability, but, you know, reducing the need for antibiotics, for instance, in those markets. You know, when we look at markets that have, you know, successfully reduced the GHG footprint of their livestock production, have brought down their need for antimicrobials in those systems, it is typically, or not typically, it's basically always led by increases in preventative veterinary care. You know, to Johnson's point, you know, a lot of that comes down to things like diagnostics, but then really moving up further, you know, whether that's vaccination or even just, you know, some more simple biosecurity steps, more sophisticated technologies like digital, et cetera. You know, it all comes down to preventative veterinary care, and that requires access to that veterinary expertise. It is certainly challenging in developing markets, you know, to Bernard's point, when he brought up the story about going up to pastoralists, it just highlights how much, you know, solutions will need to be localized in so many of these markets and sort of adapt to the systems that already exist here today. So whether that's, you know, public-private partnerships, looking to build up, you know, more workforces of veterinary paraprofessionals, recognizing that getting full-fledged veterinarians in some of these markets really can be a challenge. So at least getting folks who are, you know, greater experts in terms of disease identification and administration of medicines can really make a difference, as well as, you know, looking at, in some markets, maybe more creative solutions. For instance, you know, one of our member companies has been running for many years a public-private partnership in North Africa with the Gates Foundation, with some governments there, that looks at, instead of veterinarians going out to poultry farms and vaccinating eggs and vaccinating chicks there, instead what they've done is they have built basically vaccination you know, plants in some ways, where they are pre-vaccinating those eggs and then providing them to the farmers themselves. So it sort of, you know, concentrates where the veterinary expertise is needed and then provides the fruits of that to the farmers themselves. So all that to be said, that, you know, veterinary expertise is crucial when we consider some of these key societal issues that we know the sector needs to take on in the coming years. And those local solutions are what's going to really need to drive the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rinkus. So far, any of the panelists would like to comment on that? If not, I would also like to introduce a new question related to the topics that we're discussing so far, specifically on regulatory concerns. And perhaps the question would be if you could identify key factors in building regulatory frameworks around the issues that we have been discussing so far. Mr. Peso, you wanted to?
Not in that portion. I have another question, but I think Mr. Barcos has a comment.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Barcos.
Yes, if you consider the regulatory issue about the national level or international level, is different. But in international level, our organization have a system for discussion the standards in animal health and welfare that after that the country considers as a reference for the legal framework. And in national level, I know a different system for discussion the regulatory issue. In some countries, I know the really good interaction with the sector involved. In the previous discussion, before to adopt any regulatory measure. In other countries, they don't have this interaction, but I believe that the discussion before to implement any regulatory issue between the sector that will be involved is a really good practice. This is my experience, and I believe in that. And also when we make our standard setting process, we receive a lot of input, not only for the member, for the partner. At the end, the member adopt the standard, but in the process we receive a lot of input from the different sectors.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Barcos. Anybody else would like to comment on this regulatory? Yes, Mr. Rinkus, go ahead.
Sure. Now, sorry to answer every question, but at least from a regulatory perspective, I'm always happy to talk about because obviously that is a key element for the private sector in terms of actually getting our products into the hands of veterinarians, farmers, pet owners, et cetera. From our point of view, regulatory systems, it is obviously the foundation of everything we do. Unless we have a regulatory approval, we cannot bring a product into a market. We cannot provide those sort of benefits to animals. And for companies, it always ultimately comes down to a investment question, economic question. If we go into a market, if we go through the processes of this regulatory approval system, are we going to get that return on investment? For smaller markets, particularly ones where perhaps the system is more opaque, maybe there is favoritism for local companies versus some of the global ones, et cetera, that becomes challenging. Particularly when you start to factor in some of those markets, things like illegal and substandard and counterfeit veterinary medicines, which we estimate are about a $1 to $2 billion black market industry across the globe each year. It becomes challenging. So what we always really focus on when it comes to regulatory systems in emerging markets is regulatory convergence. So the idea that how much can we align the processes, the testing, the data required for a regulatory submission with some of the global standards for it, because that does allow for data to be the same and be reused across markets to get through that process, and doesn't require investment in additional testing. And then B, for some of those markets, where can we develop some more creative solutions? So for instance, East Africa is a great example where there are mutual recognition protocols across a number of countries there, which is essentially the idea of, if you achieve a regulatory approval in one of those markets, all the others as a part of that mutual recognition protocol also accept that product and consider it approved there. So that really creates a significant incentive for a company to say, okay, if I provide that investment to get through one regulatory system, I'm actually opening up for myself 5, 6, 7 different countries where I can now sell this product. So, it still ensures the safety, efficacy of the product, but really makes a much better business case for the company themselves. So, taking on some of those kind of underlying challenges, but also looking towards some of those interesting solutions, I think will definitely lead the way as we look ahead in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Peso, you had another question?
There's more than a question, I think is a comment. In Mr. Rinca's presentation, he make a statement on the effect of diseases on greenhouse gas emissions. I have been reviewing the literature on this topic in general, but I found a lot on the effect of genetics, effect of feeds and diets, pastures, and so on. So the effect of the silvopastoral systems, but very little information on the effect of diseases on greenhouse gas emissions. I think it is an area that need more attention from the researchers first, because the impact will vary depending on the production system and the conditions in which the livestock systems are practiced. And that is why I comment. I think it is. I probably in the initial comment I missed that point, but I think it's very important to keep it in mind.
Absolutely. And if I can just respond to that quickly, just to say I fully agree. One of the things that, and Jonathan talked about this when it comes to economic data, but there's a real dearth of data when it comes to the impacts of animal health across all 3 of those sustainability pillars, economic, environmental, and social. It is, I think we can make a clear case that when animals are sick, when animals are lost, it's pretty easy to understand that has that environmental effect, because you are investing natural resources, whether that is, water, GHGs expended in terms of feed production, et cetera, on an animal that ultimately doesn't reach market or produces less, et cetera. But we need to have the ability to make that case clearly with data, because we understand that, other sectors, other priorities, particularly when we look at governments that have, limited budgets, for instance, when other, ministries and such are coming to the table saying, we have a measured GHG effect, within this. If we take this action, we can reduce it by Y%. That makes a clear investment case for a government. For animal health, we often don't have that same data, which is a significant challenge, and ultimately ends up with animal health and livestock in general kind of moving down the priority list, because it doesn't have that data to support some of the statements that are, logical. Folks understand it, folks agree, but doesn't have the underpinning data so that it can slot into some of these strategies around, climate, economics, et cetera. So I fully agree, Daniel.
Mr. Villalobos.
Hi, thanks. Yes, it's very interesting what you're saying, but we have seen in different countries in Latin America the manage of the grazing has increased the health of the animals, and that takes to less deaths per the pack of animals. So the emissions have been decreased in the accounting that we are taking. So that's important. That it's always a link. The sustainable livestock is a link into disease, and also to the greenhouse emission, because you will have less animals and that are emitting at the end of the end of the product. That's what we are accounting the emissions. So yeah, and about the economics, we have seen that is sustainable livestock is not more expensive than regular practices. So what we need is more incentives for farmers so they can start making more practices like this, because that will be a better for the economics, for the environment, and for health also.
Thank you very much, Hernan. We will now take a look at what you have been commenting on the Slido. And I will also give the word now to Mr. Peso, who will be doing some concluding observations for this very interesting discussion that we've just had. Mr. Peso?
Thank you, Mariel. Yeah, I want to thank all the presenters for their contributions this morning. It has been a very, very educational session, particularly for those who are not in the animal health side, you know. In my case, I am an animal scientist, but I have the privilege to work in many institutions with veterinarians and public health people, and do recognize the importance of their role when we analyze sustainable food systems, particularly those based on animal food sources, animal food sources. No? Then I think it is, we have had a good contribution of all. The discussion has been rich. Probably we did not get as many as we wanted, but anyway, we will review all the contributions, and we'll work on the preparation of the report for the GASL meeting in Thailand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peso. As we wrap up today's session, we'll also like to let you know some of the next steps that are being taken place in this GASL initiative. The main learnings and takeaways messages will feed the discussion of the 8th GASL regional consultation, as Mr. Peso just mentioned, that will take place around the world in the next 6 months, from the 8th of October to the 17th of October, in preparation of the 13th GASL global meeting. I will show you now some of the regional consultations that are scheduled for the next few weeks. You can see here that the consultations will take place across the globe in different regions, which would create a more holistic understanding of the situation we have from the 8th of September, Oceania, Latin America and the Caribbean, Western Europe, South and Southeast Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and also in Beijing from the 16th to the 17th. There are still some dates to be confirmed in North America. We would also like to remind you that our next webinar will be taking place next September the 11th at Rome time. We will be, you can access this information also via our social media platforms in Facebook and YouTube. And we would like to, again, on behalf of GASL and CATIE, thank everyone who has participated in today's session. We are looking forward to continue hearing about your ideas, your solutions. What do you think are those drivers on the different areas that we're talking about? And again, I would like to thank all of the panelists who have participated today. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all very much.